This is the In Context podcast with your host, Karin von Hippel.
Welcome to today's edition of In Context. It's RUSI's podcast with influential and interesting people, and we talk to them about their lives and their careers and how they got to the point that they're at now. So it's a real pleasure today to welcome Alison Levitt. She's a Queen's Counsel at Two Hare Court, which is the chambers of Jonathan Laidlaw, QC. Alison is one of the country's foremost barristers on crime, especially business crime. And she also focuses on cases with a significant foreign and public policy aspect to it. So all very much in RUSI's wheelhouse. And of course, she is a trustee at RUSI. Welcome, Alison, and thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you very much.
For those of you who may not know fully what a QC is, or even a barrister, if you're not a Brit, some of it's a little bit confusing. Can you just explain a little bit about what a barrister does and what it takes to become a QC?
Barristers are lawyers. In England and Wales, the legal system is divided into two different kinds of lawyers. Some are solicitors and some are barristers. The distinction between the two goes back a long way in history, but from the point of view of the public perception, usually barristers are described as the lawyers who stand up in court and practice advocacy. And in England and Wales, we wear robes, we wear gowns, and we wear wigs, and we wear things called bands, which are kind of, I think they're also sometimes known as tabs. They're kind of white things that go instead of a collar. Queen's Counsel, or QC, is the senior rank of barristers. You have to apply, and you are appointed by the Queen, hence the title Queen's Counsel. It's also sometimes known as taking silk. And the reason it's called taking silk is because traditionally Queen's Counsel wear silk robes, whereas junior barristers, i.e. non-Queen's Counsel, wear stuff robes made of wool, worsted, that kind of thing. I think these days, not so many of us wear actual silk robes. They tend to be made of rayon, but the point remains, our outfit in court is slightly different.
Okay, it's all very interesting. I think there was a wonderful drama show called Silk on TV a while back. So I felt like I learned a lot more about by watching that, but I'm sure.
I would like to suggest that though Silk is a completely wonderful program, and in fact written by a very good friend of mine who was a practicing barrister. We were pupils together, we were apprentices together many years ago. I think that even Peter himself would say that Silk is not intended to be, how can I put this, an information film for people thinking about learning about the law. It's a drama, so don't take everything on it as being of gospel truth. But it is a wonderful program.
I can't believe you said that about television. But it's a very big deal that you are a QC, and I know very few people get to that level. Now, you initially got involved in RUSI through our financial crime program a while back, and you were on an advisory board for that program, right?
Yeah.
And then we lured you in to help us in a lot of other ways. You know, RUSI is really, in many ways, expanding its definition of security. So we do defense, security, and geopolitics. And security includes, obviously, financial crime, organized crime, cyber crime, so many other aspects. And so it's really great to have your expertise looking at a number of the problems that we face as a country, as a globe, basically. So let's start at the beginning, which is what we like to do. Well, not at the very beginning, but maybe we'll start when you went to University of St. Andrews, where you studied the history of art. Now, that isn't an obvious leap to law in my head, but I'm sure there's a very good explanation for that.
Well, I have wanted to be a barrister all my life, since I was certainly a teenager. And I discovered that you didn't have to have a law degree in order to become a barrister. You could do something that is known as sometimes as the conversion course. It's the graduate diploma in law. And once I'd found out about this, it then became, okay, well, all I need to do is a subject at university, pick a subject, any subject. It doesn't have to be vocational. And I loved history of art. And so I thought, okay, I'm going to spend 4 years studying that, because if I'm going to spend the whole of the rest of my life as a lawyer, it'd be quite nice to do something else at the same time. But even then, I think I was thinking along the lines of what has turned out to be my profession, because I'm a criminal barrister. I've done criminal law all my life. And my dissertation as part of my degree was on rape in the graphic arts, the myth of heroic seduction was its title. So even then I had that interest, and certainly I have an interest in the way that sexual offences, particularly against women, but also against men as well, are dealt with in the criminal justice system. So I guess there are a few themes going on.
Yeah, well, I mean, and presumably you might get dragged into art theft cases, or no?
In fact, I'm not sure. I think I may have done one art theft case during my career, but on the whole, they tend to be simply about theft rather than being about art. So the crossover is not immense, but I do like to hope. I think that the things that make people successful barristers are a lot more than simply knowing the law. They're about a whole load of other skills and attributes and qualities. And I think being a well-rounded or a well-educated person is probably part of it. And the great thing about doing history of art at St Andrews, which is part of the Scottish system, so you do it in conjunction with a number of other subjects over 4 years, is that it was like a liberal arts degree. There was much less time spent looking at brush strokes and attribution of paintings than people might imagine. And it was all about seeing art in the context of what was going on at the time it was produced. So the politics, the literature, the history, music, philosophy, all of that informed what we were learning about. And in fact, I did one course when in my final year at St Andrews as part of my history of art degree, which was about theories of communication. And we didn't look at a single picture throughout the whole time. We looked at people like Lyotard and Lacan and all those philosophers, and how the theories about communication affect what we think about art in all its various forms. So it was an amazing degree, and I was very lucky.
Yeah, it sounds great. I tried to take art history when I was at college, but I stupidly took a course that was just after lunch, and they turned the lights out and everyone basically fell asleep. So I didn't get very far in that class. So I'll have to relearn. Maybe I'll buy you a drink for a bit of art education.
Maybe we'll go and look at a few things in galleries together. But I have to warn you, Karin, that the way I have a particularly idiosyncratic way of going to look at things in galleries. I reckon about 20 minutes is enough. Mm-hmm. I couldn't spend hours and hours and hours. And I like to go and look at particular things and then leave again.
Perfect.
And think about it and then go back again.
I'm in. So, but I understand as well, your mother was a barrister and your daughter is a barrister. Now, your mother being a barrister, is that what got you excited about being a barrister?
Well, certainly when people ask me what made me decide to become a barrister, my stock answer is lack of imagination, because I do come from quite a long line of lawyers. My grandfather was a solicitor. And as you've already said, one of my parents was a barrister, which is not uncommon in the law. It happens quite a lot, but I'll come back to that if I may, because I'm very interested in outreach and inclusion and about how we become better represented in the laws. So I'll come back to that. But in my case, I am unusual because the parent who is the lawyer is my mother, not my father. And my child is my daughter, not my son. And so we will be 3 generations of female barrister. And I think that's pretty unusual. I'm always a bit anxious about talking about it, because I never want anybody who might listen to this who aspires to be a barrister to think, oh yeah, it's one of those professions where it's just handed down, father to son, everybody comes from the same sorts of backgrounds. If that was true, it's not true anymore. And I feel very anxious about the fact that the judiciary, many of whom are still drawn from the ranks of barristers and from Queen's Counsel, there are always anxieties about the fact that they may not be as representative of the society in which we live as we would like them to be. And I want people to feel that if they have an interest in and an aptitude for being a barrister, they should not let the fact that they don't have any connections or they don't come from the traditional background put them off, because we are doing such a lot to try and make sure that we're much more inclusive than we were.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. I mean, look, my mother was a doctor, my grandmother was a doctor, And, I guess what it gave me was more the confidence that I could do it.
Yeah.
Because I grew up in a society where, I grew up in a place where it wasn't very supportive of women having careers. So I think, both of us have been quite lucky in that way to get the confidence, but it's still incredibly difficult to become a barrister. It's a lot of work.
Well, in my case, I was just obsessed with the cases that my mother, and in fact, my stepfather was also a QC. My stepfather was the second black QC in the country. He was originally from Jamaica. And that's pretty unusual at the time as well. So maybe that has helped my interest in equality and diversity and inclusion. But I was just obsessed with the cases. And sometimes when people say to me, what are the major skills you need to be a criminal barrister? I say being really nosy, being really interested in ways human beings work and what makes them do sometimes terrible things. And then trying to get, some kind of redress for that.
Yeah, sure. Try and help. Now, but let's talk a bit about juggling careers. I suppose I need to be asking the men this as well, more than I probably do. But it seems somehow women end up with the burden of childbearing as well as, being a barrister, being a QC is obviously incredibly hard work, lots of reading, huge files over the weekends and evenings after lots of preparation. How did you manage to juggle all that?
With difficulty. It was tough and it was hard. And a lot of the time, I think I felt like, was it really worth persevering with this? And I think if I'm honest, if I could have afforded to stop for a bit, I might well have done. I'm immensely glad that I couldn't have afforded to stop because many of my friends and contemporaries who said, I'm just going to take a short break, they didn't come back. And the profession and the criminal justice system and the wider society lost some really great women there. I was married to my first husband at the time, and in some ways I'm not a very good example of how to combine work and child raising because he and I made the decision to become a role-reversed household. He gave up his work and stayed at home, looked after the children while I was out as a barrister. That being said, there's a lot of stuff about, if you're trying to be a halfway decent parent, there's a lot of stuff that you need to do. And sometimes life as a junior barrister rushing around all over the country is not terribly conducive to that. The number of missed sports days and missed nativity plays and missed parents' evenings, and one doesn't feel great about it. And I think if I were to have any advice for those coming after me, it's first of all, get in as much help as you can, even if it's just somebody to help a bit with the housework or somebody to give you a bit of extra babysitting or something like that. Because above all, please don't give up because it does get easier and you will later on be so grateful. And probably your children will be grateful as well. My children happen to be daughters and I think they feel, I'm speaking for them and they may be, if they listen to this, they may say that's not true at all. But I think they feel that a sense of pride and that I've given them something to show them the way for them in their own careers as well. And I definitely think it was worth it. So that would be my major thing. Please, to other women, please don't give up. However tough you find it, it will be worth it in the end.
Yeah, no, I think in our case, neither of my parents were around much when we were kids because they were both medical doctors, but I was essentially a feral child anyway. So, but they often do say that children of working parents can be more independent, etc. I'm not entirely sure if that's true, but
one thing that I do think is changing is, first of all, improvements in technology help.
Yeah, that's true.
Because in the days when I was a junior barrister, what you had to do was you had to be back in chambers at 6 o'clock in the evening to wait for the brief for the following day, and you wouldn't know what it was. You wouldn't have had a chance to look at it. So you could be in court in somewhere like Northampton, and you would have to go physically back into chambers in my case, Gray's Inn, wait there till 6 o'clock. Sometimes later, because we were the juniors, we were at the bottom of the pecking order. The papers would then turn up. We'd then have to get home, then deal with, bath, supper time, bedtime story, bed for the children, and then sit down to prepare your case for the following morning. Now, that tends, like most papers get emailed to you. If you're a criminal practitioner, everything is now online. There's a platform that you log into, so all you need is a laptop. So you don't have to go in. So that's one good thing. The second thing is I do think that things are changing and that there are now all kinds of protocols about wellness that are basically demanding that the system should see people's caring responsibilities as something that needs to be factored into the working life. And that, I mean, when I first started out, if you were to say to somebody, look, I'm really sorry, I can't do this case that week because it's half term, but I could do it the following week, you'd sort of get treated like, are you really serious about doing this job? Now, I think that it is regarded as perfectly respectable for both men and women to say, I'm sorry, I have caring responsibility. It may not even be a child. It could be an elderly parent. That mean that it's actually not possible for me to stay on at court until 6:30 every evening or something like that. So I hope that things are changing.
No, I think they have changed a lot. I mean, certainly at work, I always say family comes first. And when I was working in the US government, I mean, some of my male colleagues were doing kiddie drop off in the morning and they would be late and people were very understanding of that. So it's definitely changed. I totally agree with you. Now, on to a very serious part of the interview. Besides your interests in art, these are your personal interests we're talking about, you're also interested in cinema, cooking, crime fiction, of course we all are, needlework, and theater. Now tell me what your favorite pandemic meal has been or your favorite recipe.
I think we've been eating probably more takeaways than we should do. That's probably true of most people. My go-to meal that doesn't take a lot of time, particularly if I've got a Zoom meeting going on till 7:00 in the evening, is salmon that's been marinated in soy and ginger and sesame and chili and lime. And you mix it up with noodles and with lots of vegetables, and it's ready in about 40 minutes. Perfect. And it feels pretty healthy, and it tastes quite good. And everybody likes it, including those who don't eat meat in our household, the numbers of which are growing by the day.
Excellent. Okay, well, now let's talk about your career progression. So in 1988, you were called to the bar by the Inner Temple. Some of this sounds very Harry Potter-esque if you don't fully understand all the legal language. But and then you became an important defense criminal advocate in the next few years, over the next decade, really. And your cases included murder, rape. We did discuss your interest and expertise in sexual violence. And you also mentioned to me that some of this included non-recent offenses against women and children. Can you explain what non-recent means for those who may not understand it?
Non-recent is another expression for what are sometimes called historic sexual offence crimes. And the reason I use non-recent is because I know that a lot of the victims don't like what happened to them being described as historic, because they say, well, it makes it sound like it was confined to the past, when in fact I, as the person who survived this, am living with the consequences of it every day. As you may know, we have no statute of limitations on the vast majority of criminal offences in this country. There are very, very few not serious ones that can only be tried in the magistrate's court. But apart from that, there is no statute of limitations. And so we are now dealing with allegations of rape and other serious sexual offences, which sometimes go back 50 years to when the complainants can sometimes be very small children indeed. That's not entirely without controversy, as you can imagine. A lot of countries have statutes of limitations. I personally think that it's right. I think that victims should be entitled to justice no matter how long after the event, provided the trial is fair and can be fair. And judges are well placed to make decisions about whether in the individual circumstances of that particular trial, it is possible for a defendant to have a fair trial. And jurors are really good at it. I think they completely understand the difficulties from both sides. And I think most of us who do jury trials think the vast majority of the time, they probably get things about right.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, interesting. But you also, including in this longer list of criminal cases, fraud, armed robbery, and serious drugs offenses. So that's a very long list of...
It's crime. It's crime in all its shapes and forms. But my first 20 years as a barrister were all defending. I defended exclusively all the time. That was not actually a political decision. It was just that I ended up in a set of chambers that only did defence work. And so that was what I did. But it makes what happened to me next kind of interesting because it was so different.
You defended the criminals?
Yeah.
Okay.
Only. Didn't prosecute. For the first 20 years, I did not prosecute at all.
Okay. Very interesting. Then, but then you became a recorder. Can you explain what that is?
So a recorder is simply a word for a part-time judge in the Crown Court. We have, in the system in England and Wales, we have part-time judges at all levels of the judiciary pretty much. So, for example, district judges who sit in the magistrates' court. There are deputy district judges who are part-timers. Circuit judges who sit in the Crown Court and in the County Court. The part-timers are called recorders. And in the High Court, there is a role of Deputy High Court Judge, again, who's part-time. When I say part-time, you have to be a qualified barrister or solicitor. And there are many solicitors who do this as well now. And you continue in practice, but you sit as a judge for maybe 6 weeks a year, something like that. It is true to say that there are other jurisdictions that don't have this and think that this is a slightly odd state of affairs and say, is there not a conflict of interest here? Are you not worried that you may end up one day you're on one side of the judicial bench and on the other day you're on the other side of it? It seems to work okay in practice. I've never come.
It makes sense that you have to understand the perspectives from all angles, though, right?
And it's a kind of training thing, because if you then become interested in applying for a full-time post, which some people do, but not everybody does, it means that you have they have a way of assessing whether you'll be any good at it, and you'll have a way of assessing whether you'd like it. But I'm interested in it as an advocate because I think it really improves your skills as an advocate, seeing it from, if you like, the umpire's point of view. For example, when we're very junior advocates and we're being given advocacy training, one of the things we're told over and over again is, please do not repeat the points that you've made. The judge will have got them, and we all listen to that. And actually, we find it quite difficult not to do it, because if you've got a good point, you want to be absolutely sure that the judge is following. I can tell you, you are sitting there up on that bench, and as the advocate comes round for their fourth pass on that point that they've made before, you just want to come down off the bench and strangle them. So that's a very crude illustration of how being a judge can help your advocacy, but it's an accurate one.
So this is the end of your career as a defender, right? And this is when you switch, when you get silk, and then you move on to becoming... No,
what happened was that I took silk after 20 years and I continued on as a defence QC. What happens is that you just get more serious cases. So you move up and you start doing a lot of murders and defending them. And then one day I was coming out of court after about a year, and I found a message on my mobile phone from a firm of recruitment consultants saying that they were recruiting for the post of principal legal advisor to the director of public prosecutions, and would I be interested? Someone had suggested my name. I thought, well, that's bizarre. And I went home and I said to my husband, I've had this really odd message. Why would anybody suggest me for this? I'm a defender, and obviously being principal legal advisor to the director of public prosecutions would make you a prosecutor. And I'm also a self-employed barrister, and I would have to be an employed barrister. I'm obviously going to tell them I'm not interested. And he said, whoa, just before you do that, let's just find out a little bit more about it. Cutting a long story short, I found myself having what the recruitment consultants described as a far-side chat with the director of public prosecutions, a man called Keir Starmer. And he said to me, look, what I need is somebody to, I'm busy running the whole organisation. I need somebody to look at some of the very serious cases and just give me assurance about them. And I also need, and other than that, if you get the job, I had to go through a bit of a process but if you get the job, you can decide pretty much what you want to do after that. You decide how best you think you can help the Crown Prosecution Service. Well, I mean, who can resist the opportunity to almost write your own job description like that, and the opportunity to work on some of the most interesting criminal cases around? And so thus it was that I left the self-employed bar and I became a civil servant and became principal legal advisor to Keir Starmer. So Keir Starmer, as he now is, for 5 years.
And a prosecutor. So you switched from being...
And a prosecutor,
so
yeah.
Just to clarify for others, you got yourself in 2008. 2009, you were master of the bench Inter-Temple. And then you became, in 2009, principal legal advisor to DPP, to Sir Keir Starmer, who became Sir later. So let's talk about some of the really interesting cases that you were involved in. I know you can't talk about too many of the details, but I know you were involved in, let's just say, the news of the world phone hacking cases, serial killer and sex offender, the Jimmy Savile affair, and a bunch of national security cases, which you probably can't talk about at all. But tell us.
Absolutely can't talk about those. No.
Tell us what you could talk about for any of those, whether it's, the serial killer or, news of the world or Jimmy Savile. I mean, these are all very familiar to people.
Well, first of all, I think I would like just to talk a little bit about the Crown Prosecution Service, which is an organisation for which I have a huge affection. And it's staffed by some really fantastic lawyers, and it's very, very diverse. There are it's the biggest employer of women lawyers and of Black and other minority ethnic lawyers in the country. And that makes it extremely interesting to work there. And it has all kinds of interesting policies about, you can do compressed hours and flexi hours. And I had some great teams there. It got me very interested in policy work because one of the things that I started to do was to look at some of the Crown Prosecution Service policies, because a well-run public prosecution service must make sure that there is consistency in the way that it applies the law, so that you will get the same decision being made by a prosecutor in Newcastle as is being made in Bodmin. You don't get regional differences that will make people feel that it's unfair or unpredictable as to what will happen. Those kinds of things create unstable societies. But also, I became very interested in communication with the public. It seemed to me, I'm not the only one, by the way, I'm not claiming this as a personal thing, but it's something that I absolutely bought into, that it was really important that the public should understand how and why prosecutorial decisions are made, so that even if they didn't agree with them, they could at least follow how that process had been reached, because sometimes cases don't get prosecuted when the public will think, well, of course they must be. And there may be good reasons. Why would you want to keep those reasons to yourself? Why not put them out there? One of the things that I learned from Keir Starmer was not to be frightened of being judicially reviewed. Judicial review is a system whereby members of the public can hold a government department to account for what it does. And we used to get frequently judicially reviewed. We'd say mostly we won. But the thing that I learned from that was that it was important. If we got the decision right, then that was really helpful to know that we were doing it the right way. But if we got it wrong, we needed to know about that sooner rather than later. And there's no shame in that. These are all difficult cases. The cases that landed up on my desk were there because they were difficult. If they hadn't been, somebody else would have sorted them out before they got there. So that, as I say, gave me a real interest in policy work and how the prosecution service works within the criminal justice system and about relations with the public. Some of these cases, Jimmy Savile is one that is pretty easy to talk about because a lot of it's in the public domain. So as may be known, much of what Jimmy Savile did only came to light after his death. But it became clear that during his lifetime, there had been some complaints made to the police that had been brought to the Crown Prosecution Service, and the CPS had said that there was insufficient evidence to prosecute him. And the reason I got involved was that the DPP just said to me, can you have a quick look at this and just check that those decisions that were made at the time were correct? And by the way, can you let me know tomorrow morning? And the file was really thin. It didn't have much in it by way of paper. And I said to him, well, if you really need the decision by tomorrow morning, then it kind of looks okay. But there's some stuff here that's nagging at me and I'm just not sure about. And he said, well, you must take the time you need. So I asked for more papers and made more investigations. And then I came to the conclusion that actually I didn't agree with the decisions that had been made at the time. And I did think there was a possibility, I put it no higher than that, a possibility that if things had been thought about a different way. There are two ways you could look at that, as being either a reputational hit for the CPS or as an opportunity for the future. And we decided it was definitely an opportunity for the future, because what was interesting about it was that the themes that had made these decisions, the ones that the officers and the CPS prosecutor took, extended way beyond Jimmy Savile himself and actually had resonances for how sexual offences are dealt with generally. And one of the things I have always wanted to make clear was that no individual police officers or prosecutors had malign motives. In fact, they were doing their very best to help. But that there was a way in which complainants of sexual offences was viewed that actually meant they were being subjected to a higher standard than victims of other offences. So, for example, if I ring up and say my house has been burgled, I don't expect the police officer who comes around to take my witness statement to be saying things like, well, you could be about to embark on a false insurance claim here, so I'm going to have to be really careful about this. And first of all, can you actually, have you got any corroboration of the fact that you even own this house or that you were burgled in the first place? That doesn't happen. So why would you do that for sexual offences? Why would you say, well, if there's no corroboration evidence, then really it's not a very strong case? That's an oversimplistic explanation of what was going on. But anyway, the DPP decided to publish my report in full so that it could be looked at and we could learn lessons from it about how to look at the prosecution of sexual offences for the future. Because one of the things that I feel very strongly about is that a lot of, not all, but a large number of victims of sexual offences may be people who are in vulnerable positions. We all know about the children in the grooming cases who have been in care. They're sometimes sex workers. They are sometimes people who've been drinking too much. There's sometimes people who found themselves in abusive relationships. They may be people with learning difficulties or mental health issues, whole raft of things. Those cases may be tricky to prosecute, but the prosecution system is here to protect the vulnerable. What kind of message would it send if we were a society and we said, well, we're only going to prosecute safe cases? Because that says to abusers, don't worry, you can go out and target the vulnerable because the prosecution system's never going to touch it. So you can go ahead with impunity. I don't think any of us really wants to live in a system like that. And the CPS, I think, has always been assiduous about trying to make sure that it takes care of the vulnerable.
But were you not worried that you would get sued if you admitted that, in the past CPS had made a mistake?
You have to do what's right. You have to do what's right. An overly defensive attitude means that you never actually move forward.
That makes sense.
This is, I became a lawyer for a whole load of slightly grandiose and idealistic reasons about, what matters in society. I happen to believe that a well-functioning criminal justice system contributes to a stable society. I think it matters that people get justice, and that matters whether you've been accused of a crime, but it also means whether you've been a victim of a crime. And therefore, if we've made mistakes in the past, you just have to hold your hands up and say, okay, we'll try and do it better next time.
I agree with that. It tells you about Kira's leadership as well, the CPS, that he was very open to that too, and willing to let you investigate it to the fullest extent, etc. So now you've done this job for about 5-6 years, is that right?
I was there for 5 years, yeah.
And then you switched yet again to go and work for a big law firm, Mishcon Dray, to become a partner and head of their white-collar crime and investigations. In other words, you were headhunted to set up this white-collar crime department, as they had no real experience in that area, right? Is that correct?
Mishcon Dray is a well-known and well-established firm. It's been around for quite a long time. But they didn't do any criminal law at all. They're not unique in that. There are plenty of big law firms that don't deal with criminal law at all. But they could see that, and maybe we'll come to touch on this in another context in a minute, but they could see that there was quite an explosion in white-collar crime both from the point of view of what was being prosecuted and from the point of view of what wasn't being prosecuted. And so they said to me, would I come and set up a white-collar crime investigations group that would incorporate not just defending people accused by, for example, the Serious Fraud Office, but also to consider things like running investigations for companies who thought that they might have a problem. And I've done a few of those in various capacities, but also to consider privately prosecuting on behalf of victims of crime if that's what they wanted. And it was a natural fit for Mishcon de Reya because they are a very heavily litigation-oriented firm of lawyers, or have been in the past. And it's a few years since I worked there. And they have a big civil fraud department. They have a big insolvency department. They have a big intellectual property department. And so working with all of those was quite a natural progression and added something. I mean, I've always seen Mishcon de Reya as being basically they're problem solvers. You know, somebody walks through the door and they've got a problem, and they're usually in crisis as well. You know, something's gone horribly wrong, either because they're a victim or they've been accused. And what you try and do is you try and propose solutions to these problems they've got. And some of those may need to step into the criminal arena. And it's good business sense. Why would you want to send them to a completely different firm if you can have that in-house as well? And it was really fascinating to do. And I loved working at Mishcon de Reya, and I made some really good friends there. And it was completely fascinating because as a barrister, I don't know if this is true of other barristers, but as a barrister, I don't really know much about what solicitors did. I think if I'm honest, I probably thought they just kind of, I don't know, they sort of managed the client and managed various kind of, I now realise what hard work it is being a solicitor, and that it's actually a completely different skill set from what it is that barristers do. And I hope that I'm a lot more humble and a lot more respectful of what my counterparts on the other side of the profession do as a result of working there.
Yeah, Alison, that's when I met you when you were at Mishcon. I remember going over several times to see you at your very nice offices over in the city. But then, so you lasted for about 4 years there, and then you switched back to becoming a barrister. So you really have done the full circuit. And as I mentioned at the beginning, you became a Queen's Counsel at Two Hare Court, where now you're back looking at many of the same criminal issues, but probably from a much more well-rounded perspective, right? Given all the different experiences that you've had, and being a judge, being a prosecutor, being a defender, working for the government, working for the private sector, or for a law firm, right? I mean, it seems that you bring much more experience back to being a barrister now.
I hope so. I mean, none of this has been planned, of course. They're just interesting things that have happened along. And I thought, great, you know, let's go and have a go at that. I don't know how much good I was at them, but I certainly enjoyed them and got a lot from it. But in the end, as I say, I love my time working in a law firm. I love my time at Mishcon de Reya, but I really missed being in court. And it was one of the things that, this may not be true of other people, it may not be true of other law firms, but it was not possible for me to spend as the head of the group and as a partner. I just couldn't be in court. I couldn't be an advocate. And I just really missed it. And so after I'd been there for 4.5 years, it seemed important that if I'd stayed there any longer, it would have been more than 10 years since I had last done a jury trial as an advocate. And that seemed like a really big milestone. And I thought, if I can get back into court within that 10 years, then that would be a good thing. So that was, I think, what made me make the decision to go when I did. And I've really enjoyed being back at the self-employed bar. I think, like all of these things, if you have a break, a lot of the niggles that might have troubled you with a job you've been in for a long time, a lot of them kind of melt away, really. And I was doing a case just before Christmas 2019, and some of my co-defending counsel and indeed my opponent, prosecuting counsel, said to me, you're always annoyingly cheerful and you don't grumble. I said, that's because I've really missed doing this. So all the things that are driving you lot around the bend, I actually, you know, it's okay because I'm back doing the thing that I really love and that I grew up doing.
So this was the Boohoo case, right?
No, it wasn't. It was a case where I was representing somebody charged with serious sexual offences. The Boohoo case is a different thing. The Boohoo case is an investigation. Mm-hmm. And I'm not going to say a lot about it because they published my report. It's in the public domain. All I can say is that it was really fascinating to do. I had a great team and I learned a lot. I think this is going to sound like a careers talk for those who are aspiring to be barristers, but one of the really interesting things about cases as a barrister is that you suddenly get dropped into things that you know nothing about and you've got to learn about them fast. The Boohoo investigation was about supply chains in the retail industry, in fashion retail industry in Leicester. Well, at that stage, I'd never been to Leicester. Mm. And I knew nothing more about fashion retail than those of us who have bought clothes online in the past. And I certainly knew nothing about supply chains. I hope that I learned really fast and it was deeply fascinating. And yes, I did go to Leicester.
But it was about modern slavery as well. And in terms of, the responsibilities of the company for, as you say, the supply chain, et cetera. So that's also even a probably more recent concern at the global level, at least, right? I mean, I think in the past people didn't care, but now that people many activists and others really try to bring these issues to light, whether it's Nike and soccer balls, being made in South Asia by children, these issues are coming to light much more than they ever did in the past as well. So the law is evolving, isn't it?
And I think also that the retailers themselves are much more or evidencing much more concern to, and I'm not just talking about Boohoo here, I'm talking about other retailers, not just in the fashion industry, that having visibility on your supply chain is really important, because if you don't know who's making your clothes that you're selling, in the end, however well-meaning you are, things can come back to bite you. So it's good to have, as I say, visibility as much as possible, because the more links there are in the chain, the more stages there are in the process, the more difficult it is for you to keep an eye on it.
Right. So given your experience in this full range, really, of criminal law from several different angles, how accurate are criminal TV shows? Go on.
How accurate are criminal TV shows? I guess many of us would say that a fully fledged criminal trial in England is probably, the reason I keep saying England, by the way, is because the Scottish system is completely different. The Northern Irish system is quite different as well. So it's not a kind of nationalistic thing. It's just a statement of fact. But a criminal trial in courts in England and Wales is probably the best free theatre in the world. Anybody's allowed to go and sit in the public gallery, or at least they can do when we're not in lockdown. And I would urge anybody who has an interest in it to just go and watch the whole kind of panoply of human life playing out there. Mm. I wouldn't like people to think that any of the participants view this as a game. Mm-hmm. I don't think they do. I think everybody takes it immensely seriously. There are some rather hackneyed comparisons between barristers particularly and actors. They're saying that, that everything from putting on your costume in terms of your robes to the fact that you're speaking lines on behalf of somebody else. But the analogy is not a true one, because with actors it is fictional, and I think every single player in every single moving part of the criminal justice system in a trial is acutely aware of the fact that this court is full of people to whom this really matters, even if they're just spectators in the public gallery or jurors who've had to take time out of their everyday life to do this really important public duty, to the court staff who keep these places running. Everybody who needs to walk out of there thinking that this system treated them with respect, listened to what they had to say, gave them an opportunity to tell their story, because not everyone can win. Not everyone's going to get, it's in the nature of adversarial proceedings that somebody is going to go away disappointed. But if you're able to help them to understand why things went the way they did, then that trial has not been a complete failure. And I guess what I regard my job as being is being ultimately about communication. I am a communicator. That's what I see myself as being.
Yeah,
in some ways more important than being a lawyer.
Yeah, no, to make sure that everybody understands how complicated these cases are. They're never just as simple as people make them out to be. But I am addicted to some of these police and, criminal.
Well, so am I. And then what does that say about me that I spend my entire time? I think there's some stuff about the thing about detective fiction is that it tends to give neat answers in a way that life does not. And this is hardly an original thing to say, but I think there is an appeal about it, that you have a problem. Human beings tend to be interested in what happens next. And there is almost always a resolution. And indeed, if there isn't a resolution, if you don't find out what the answer is, the person who did it, who's the murderer, but sometimes in modern ones, obviously, why they did it as much as who did it, you're going to feel really cheated. And so I guess that perhaps it's not so surprising that if one enjoys doing it for a living, can I watch courtroom scenes in films and dramas? Well, of course, it entirely depends on how accurate they are. Yeah, and some are really, really accurate, and they've obviously had lawyers advising them on their procedure and things, and you kind of settle down to watch that and enjoy it. Some are so terrible that you end up hurling things at the television set, saying, "No, that could never happen like that." And when it's something that makes the system look bad, then I feel angry about that, because I think it's doing a disservice. So, if, for example, I see, you will have gathered from what we've been talking about, that I have taken a great interest in and have a degree of experience of dealing with the way sexual offences are treated by the criminal justice system. Things have moved on so far from the brutal way in which complainants were often treated in the past, that if I see a television depiction of a complainant being treated with a lack of sympathy or a lack of understanding, or I'm thinking, please don't broadcast that, because there will be people out there who think that that's really how it is, and they won't want to come forward, whereas actually we want to encourage them to do so.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. So what you're telling us is you don't gather all the suspects in the library at the very end, right?
I wish. So,
and I understand you and I were chatting the other day that you actually are still working in the courtroom, even though there is COVID, and that you still have jurors, that you just set up systems so that people can be socially distant, plexiglass, etc. But there is
a lot of plexiglass.
Right.
There's loads of plexiglass, and lots of people wearing masks and trying to deal with as much as possible remotely using platforms to do so. That's, I think, hopefully going to be something that remains with us after this pandemic has receded, and will be a really beneficial development. We have learned from this that it's not actually a fantastic idea often to drag people all the way to a physical courtroom building for a hearing that's important but may not last longer than about 15 minutes.
Yeah.
If you can do it with all, obviously there've got to be safeguards. People have to realize that this is actually a virtual court. You can't record it. You can't film it. You've got to tell the truth. You can't have people sitting in there telling you what to say. That sort of thing. It's got to be taken seriously. But subject to that, if you've got hearings where, for example, the parties are trying to set a date, or they're trying to deal with some administrative stuff, like whether they've got the right papers and things, how much better to be able to deal with that on a remote basis. And I do hope also that will be a development that will help those, again, with caring responsibilities, that actually, if my child has got to be kept home from school because she's sick, and I'm due in court, but I know it's only a 15-minute hearing, if I can do it remotely, then that's something that will help to keep people who might otherwise have felt they couldn't carry on at the bar to actually carry on practicing.
And no, it's fantastic, isn't it, in so many ways? I mean, it's been horrible in a lot of ways, but there have been many innovations that so many of us have realized. Now,
but it is a bit weird pattering around a courtroom. Our jurors are sitting in like little plexiglass boxes so that they're not coming into contact with each other. It's a lot slower because it takes longer to get people in and out of the courtroom, because you've got to keep them 2 meters away from each other. And it is odd not being able to see people's faces as much as you normally would do.
Harder to read it, isn't it? You only can read signs. Yeah, that's a very good point. Now we're coming to the end, so just a few more bits and pieces before we finish. But you do have a very long list of charitable work and associations over the years. And I see that you were quite interested in the politics and the policy of the bar. Now, are there, I understand that you played a very important role in getting women to wear trousers in the court, and we're only in the 21st century. I guess that might have happened in the 20th century, I hope.
I was the chairman of the Young Barristers Committee of the Bar Council, and women advocates, mostly barristers, but a few solicitors as well, had to wear skirts in court. There was one woman who had a special dispensation to wear trousers because I don't know very well, this may be anecdotal, but she had injured a leg and therefore needed to wear trousers. But other than that, we all had to wear skirts, and it was preposterous. I can remember being sent to Lewes Crown Court in the winter on one occasion and struggling up the hill in the snow from the station all the way up with the bags and the books and the files, and then you're in a skirt and heels as well, and it was just and also it's just kind of ridiculous. So with the help of the then chairman of the bar, Peter Goldsmith, now Lord Goldsmith, who became Attorney General, I said to him, could we get the rules changed? And it would be something that, although looking like a tiny and slightly shallow thing, actually would be immensely important, not just to women barristers, but also to the image of the bar itself. And so to his great credit, he went off and he asked the Lord Chief Justice, and the following week it was done, 1995.
Well, now when did the police women have to, they had to wear skirts for a very long time too.
Yeah, I don't know, actually. I don't know when they were probably going to find out. I looked it up on the internet.
What about the wig?
What about the wig? Oh, what about the wig? So I've grown up with this, of course, because my mother had a wig, for a barrister's wig. For those who don't know, they're based on 18th century men's dress that you see in the portraits. And so to me, it doesn't feel quite as strange as it might do to other people. I kind of take it for granted. Sometimes when I think about it, I think this is just ridiculous, particularly women. Why are we wearing this 18th century get-up? I think on the whole, I'm probably in favour of doing away with wigs. It's not something that I feel terribly strongly about, but I would just like to put the argument in favour of keeping them. The first is they are actually an immensely effective disguise. A barrister wearing a wig looks so different from how they look when they're not wearing it that actually it does make it quite difficult for people to identify them. And lots of barristers and lots of judges, they will travel, even in really big high profile cases, they will travel to and from court by public transport and nobody will know who they are. So that I think is quite important. Yeah. The other thing is that I think that slightly counterintuitively, it has a potential effect on the whole kind of diversity and inclusion thing, because when you're wearing that wig, everybody knows that you're the advocate. So if you are a woman, if you come from an underrepresented group, there is less risk that somebody will make assumptions about your standing as a professional in the courtroom. To my great sorrow, this is not universally true in 2021. We will all have seen reports in the newspapers of some horrific incidents recently of particularly young Black members of the bar basically being challenged on the basis that they must be the defendant or something like that. I can't tell you how distressing it is to hear that is still occasionally going on. Wearing wigs and gowns does actually help to make sure that everybody realises the part that you play in the system.
Okay, well, those are very good arguments. So, Alison, just before we ask you the last question about advice for the next generation, tell me a bit about your interest in RUSI and really the connections you see between financial crime, criminal issues, and national security.
Well, I've become interested over the course of my career in elements of policy and how they kind of affect not just the criminal justice system, but wider society. And so a think tank, in a way, is a natural progression from that. And of course, it's going to be RUSI, isn't it? Think tank of the year, what can one say? But apart from sounding only slightly facetious, RUSI's emphasis on national security really interests me, because I think that national security takes so many different forms these days. And my view is, I know shared, for example, by parts of RUSI, for example, the Centre for Financial Crime Security Studies, is that financial crime, economic crime, is as big a threat to national security now as many of the more usual actors, such as military threats or terrorism threats or even cyber threats. And I think this because there is so much loss to the public purse and to individual victims through economic crime that it has a devastating effect on the economy and is potentially slightly destabilizing in terms of society. I'm very interested in, for example, the justice system trying to form private and public partnerships to tackle economic crime, to try and find smart ways of dealing with it, because you could put the entirety of the public sector budget into trying to investigate and prosecute financial crime. And there is a real risk that the fraudsters and the criminals would still be one step ahead of you. Mm-hmm. So what then does a government do? Well, it either throws its hands up into the air and says, well, there's nothing we can do, but I don't think that's acceptable. Or it has to divert money from other parts of the justice system. And that probably isn't acceptable either, because there are very real threats out there. Or it has to pour in a whole load of money, which it may not have, or it's got to do different things. So why not ask the private sector to help with this? And that's why I've become interested in things like private prosecutions. There isn't time in the course of this to discuss that in all its complexities. And there are lots of, you have to look at what the risks are and how you mitigate those risks. But it's that aspect of national security that I have found really interesting and that has really brought me to RUSI. Yeah. So it's been a real privilege to be allowed to play a part by being a trustee.
Well, we're grateful for your expertise in that area as well, and need to do more even in that. So we'll be bugging you even more in the coming months. Well, unfortunately, we're coming to the end of our time together. It's been a lot of fun. My last question I always ask everyone is, what advice would you give to young adults, basically, leaving university, trying to figure out what they want to be when they grow up? Everyone comes from very different areas, but there's often you might thinking back on your career, given that you've done so many different things in your field. Do you have? And of course, you were also a judge, which I don't think we talked about much.
We did a bit. We did a little bit.
Yeah. But not maybe as much as we could have. But what kind of advice would you recommend? The law? Would you recommend other fields?
I think, I have been a barrister all my working life. I've never had another job, and I think it has been the most fantastic career. I've been immensely lucky in the things that it has. And so I guess for the right person, it's a great career, but it has to be for the right person. It is quite competitive. It's much more competitive than it was even when I started out. And it isn't right for everybody. It can be pretty stressful. And there are other things that you can do that are equally interesting. I think that for most barristers, they actually cannot contemplate the idea of doing anything else. And they've got to try and see if they can do it, because they can't go to their grave not having given it a go. Mm-hmm. If you feel like that, come on in, the water's lovely, and there's so much more opportunity around for those than there were. But on the other hand, how many lawyers does the world need? There are other things that I think that people can do that contribute equally, but I don't know much about them because I don't have the first-hand experience that I have of this, which has been terrific.
Great. Well, that's a very good answer. Thank you. Alison Levitt, Queen's Counsel. It's really been a privilege talking to you today, and it's been a pleasure. So thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to today's podcast. We always appreciate any comments, positive or negative. Please email them to us or tweet us at RUSI_org or #InContext. All the podcasts are on the RUSI website, so please do go back and listen to any of the ones that you have missed and send us comments.
This podcast was produced by Tom Ascott, developed by Caroline Tranter, with further research from Neil Watling. Keep up to date with the latest defence and security analysis by visiting www.rusi.org.